Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is going to be a little bit of a different sort of discussion. We will have with us Assaf Oren, who will be joining shortly. I've also decided to put a virtual background for today's session for the sake of emphasizing a little bit the severity of the situation. Now, Assaf is up until recently head of partnership and alliances at Future Summit. Prior to that, he was a partnership manager at EcoMotion Community. And prior to that, he served as North American Division Coordinator for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel. Concurrently, he also served as General Assembly Rapporteur at Israel at the UN. We intend on having a sort of very non-biased and focused discussion, with none of us being foreign affairs specialists, on the current situation in the Middle East, as well as his experience and his perspective on what has happened from his tenure at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, as I said, we intend on looking at the current situation in Israel, the variances in the responses both internally and externally, his experience and how decision making is done efficiently both internally within Israel and externally, the role of the international arena and the impact that that might have. From his perspective, what is the role of the potential resolution of the current crisis? Israel's role in the world and importance in the world, or non-importance, whichever perspective you want to take. I lean on the important side, but again, that's up for debate. Israel's role in the world, the challenges he has faced being an Israelite, and potential, words of wisdom to the next generation. So I hope you all enjoyed. He will be joining us shortly. So, Asaf, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I gave a brief introduction before you joined, a little bit on your background and everything. If you want to take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself, that would also be great.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast, on your channel. It's great to reconnect. For the viewers and listeners who don't know, Alex and I go way back in our Model UN history uh, in the Euromoon conference, where we're delegates in the same committee. So it's great to catch up. Yeah, so since finishing my degree at Tel Aviv University, I studied my BA in Political Science and Communications and my MA in Diplomacy. And since then, I worked for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs at the UN, at the Permanent Mission of Israel at the UN, doing General Assembly resolutions covering all the informal debates that are occurring before the adoption of the resolutions on behalf of our mission. After that, I worked at the headquarters of the MFA in Jerusalem, being the coordinator for the North America division. So all our relations with the US and Canada, very interesting and exciting stuff there.
And for
And
anyone listening, he was a hell of a debater.
yeah, for sure. And then in recent years, I've been doing some NGO stuff. So working for the Israel Innovation Institute, which basically promotes communities of startups in Israel to help them abroad, assist them with scaling up, with matching with investors and other stakeholders. So doing innovation work with NGOs, that's what I've been doing since. And yeah, I'm
That's
happy to be here.
that's a very interesting transition. Before we get into the current situation and what's going on in that discussion, just a brief sidetrack. How has that transition been for you, and do you see business in general, investors, consulting, that whole scheme of things impacted by the current situation that has been going on for quite some time, ever since the instance of October?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, for me personally, the transition from doing public service, working for the government office, the foreign affairs, to NGO, it's actually really exciting because it's a transition that my experience and everything that I've done in the foreign affairs pretty much serves well when you enter the NGO sphere because it's all about it. It's basically diplomacy in a different form, right? You help connect. You're the facilitator between if it's the startups and the investors and government entities, private and public. So you basically serve as this facilitator between all these stakeholders, and it very much resembles diplomacy, just um, in a different environment. So for me, it was super exciting. Um, and yeah, in the current situation, we can dive deep into that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely, let's do that. So walk me through from whichever point you want to take it. You want to take it from the incidents of last October up until now. Do you want to start with the recent Iran situation? Whichever way you want to go about it, I'll be more than happy to
I
take it
mean,
from there.
there's so much there's so much to cover. I mean, it's like we joke here in Israel. We say that what happens in Israel in a week is what happens in some countries in a lifetime, right? So the speed of things occurring here is so crazy. So
You
it's
can
hard to
see that. Like
choose.
when I came last year, sorry to interrupt you there, but when I came last year, you could feel how tense it was. And I came in a situation where, it wasn't this tense, but it was still pretty tense. And you could feel it on the day to day how tense it is. But again, everybody's living their life. They're enjoying the moment no matter what happens. So it's a very weird dynamic to me. I found it very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that really characterizes the Israeli spirit that, we're going through these hardships and really extreme situations, but we always keep our heads high and stay positive. And, Israel is actually ranked, if I'm not mistaken, number 9 in the world like happiness index. There's this index that they do of the most like the happiest nations. And Israel, for whatever reason, is always at the top 10. And always people ask, you're a country that has so many wars and these conflicts going on, how can you be so happy? And I think it's that spirit of no matter what happens to us and what reality, in what reality we live in, we always try to stay positive, be happy.
The
Um,
Miami of the Middle East. I
I
mean,
know.
it's very hard to be upset with that beach you guys have in Tel Aviv. That is a hell of a beach.
Yeah, and you can see the background behind me. I especially prepared this Tel Aviv backdrop for this conversation, but I live actually in Tel Aviv. It's my city, and if maybe we can have a starting point, it's last week, or I should say maybe 12 days ago. So this recent conflict between Israel and Iran, it caught me personally. I was sleeping, and at 2:58 a.m. we had these sirens go off in our phones. So they take over, they control your phone, right? And they have these automatic alarms, and we all woke up not knowing what's going on. And the siren said, um, be close to a bomb shelter for we don't know how long. Just be close to a bomb shelter. So there weren't sirens going off. The Iranians weren't actually firing missiles, but they were preparing the population to take shelter soon in case there would be an incoming attack, right? So I get this notice in my apartment. I don't have like a proper bomb shelter in my Tel Aviv apartment. So the first thing I did was just to pack a bag. I put in the clothes and the things I need most, and I just drove the fastest I could to my parents' home, which they live like 20 minutes away by car. They have we have a proper bomb shelter here. I'm at my parents' house now, so we have
Wow.
a proper shelter here. Yeah, and I just drove because I said I don't know when it's gonna come, but if it's gonna come, I better be
Be
in a
safe.
place where I'm protected, yeah, and safe. So that's where it caught me that morning, right?
Wow, that's amazing on two fronts. Primarily, I don't even know how to react to that. But um, the thing I'm thinking, the moment you're telling the story, is how fantastic the defense system is for you to be able to see something like that coming without Iran even starting the attacks, and B, as an individual, how the hell do you react at that time? And you had patience and the maturity or the wisdom or whatever it is that told you to pack your stuff and go to the bomb shelter, which was your parents' house, etc., etc. Is this a common modus operandi? Do all people think that way in Israel? Are they all prepared?
It's a very good question. I mean, of course, there was sort of a panic going on. Like people didn't know where are they going now? Did they already fire missiles? Like what the hell is going on? There was a sense of panic, but with that, we do have this. Like we are used to these types of situations, and when we get these instructions on our phones, it's not the first time we have these situations. So it's like we didn't know what exactly was going on at the time, but you know what you know, and what you know is to follow any instructions you get at the time, and that was, be near a bomb shelter in the next few hours or whenever. So we did know what to do. We just don't know. We didn't know what was going on around us. But what I can say is that, yeah, the air defense system, it's, I think it's one of the best in the world, and we're very proud of that. And we're lucky, very, very lucky to have that. And yeah, I guess it's what saved our lives in this recent campaign between Israel and Iran, because it was a hell of a crazy, crazy situation.
I don't want to be the devil's advocate, but I was actually expecting a little bit better of the of the defense system. So I always thought that Tel Aviv would have been impenetrable, for example.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and there you had it. You had missiles actually hit, and I was like, oh, okay, wow.
Mhm.
So it's not impenetrable.
Yeah. So actually, the percentage of the success rates of the interception, if I'm not mistaken, is around between 90 to 94%. So if you have, 100 missiles shot at you, which was what happened at the first day of this war, then 90% means 10, right? So even if you have a 90% success rate, which is pretty high, it means statistically 10 will not be intercepted. And these 10 are lethal, right? They're not like missiles from Gaza or from Hezbollah even. They're from Iran. They're from 2,000 kilometers away. So they're much more severe. And yeah, so even if you have this percentage, then it means a few will hit, which is pretty sad, and it caused a total of 28 deaths. And by the way, again, speaking of which is very sad, of course, but speaking of the air defense, when Israel prepared for such war, and of course, the government and the military and all these institutions prepared this for a long, long time. They knew it was going to come one day, this
I'm pretty
conflict
sure
with
at this
Iran.
point you guys are always prepared.
I mean, they've been preparing this for, they say, more than 20 years, right? This exact week and a half or 12 days, they've been preparing for that for decades. And some of the estimates, that the pessimistic ones, estimated between 800 and 1,000 deaths, not just casualties, injuries, but deaths in such scenario because of incoming rockets from Iran and Hezbollah and all these Iranian proxies around us. So when you have these estimates of 800 to 4,000 civilian deaths, but then you
Mm.
have 28 total during this conflict, which of course it's super sad, but you get the perspective. So
It's good statistics.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, it was a pretty intense 12 days for us. I was here with my parents, taking shelter whenever there were sirens from Iran. It was pretty crazy. You hear the interceptions above you. Sometimes you hear the actual missiles drop. Like it's like a bigger explosion. And even if it's in 20-minute drive away, 30-minute drive away, you can still hear them very
Not that
clear.
big of a country either way, so I'm not surprised that the impact is much bigger in scale. It's not like they're bombing the U.S., for example, which has massive lands, et cetera, et
For
cetera. Israel,
sure.
relatively speaking, just like Greece, a very small country. It's not that big.
Yeah, yeah, and I think something that maybe is good to mention at this point is that, Israel took this initiative and started this basically attack against the nuclear facilities of Iran to eliminate this threat. And it wasn't a war with the Iranian people. And I see all these, conversations online of, starting wars in the Middle East. This was not to start a war, it was to prevent a much greater situation that could have evolved if Iran indeed had nuclear weapons and
So
could threaten the Middle East.
to be 100% honest with you, and I think we've had this discussion way back in Maastricht too. I didn't really want to go down that path because I wasn't too sure to what extent you wanted to discuss it, or it's something that's easily discussable at the current moment. But it seems to me that, and I know quite well how this is going to sound to whoever is watching it, but Israel has always been on a good amount of times, at least on the defensive side of a war, never starting a war. And this was very surprising to me because this was my experience when I came there, right? This is what I saw. And what I saw is a community where you had and Muslims and Christians and Jews, and they were all living together. And yes, some unnamed parties were really, really upset about it. Um, I got a cab driver because I spent a lot of time in the airport. I went through a series of questioning and a series of tests before I was actually allowed entry into the country, which to be fair made sense because you had some random half Arab guy coming in the middle of a war. Um, so it was an overall great experience. But I went out and I got a cab driver who then took me to Jerusalem as well the next day, etc., etc. And he kind of explained the dynamics of everything and how
Yeah.
it works in Israel. And beyond the fact that it was always on the defensive, the backstory, and this was a very surprising backstory to me, was that when Israel, so the Jewish people moved to Israel, right? A lot of them came bearing money. And while the initial agreements were, yes, some trade, but not really interactions one side to another, a lot of people from the Muslim side actually started selling most of their property off to the Jewish side. And all of a sudden you had heavily paid properties that were in the best locations among Muslim communities. And these Muslim communities then started growing their hatred towards the Jewish communities. So that's how I understood it as a very basic sort of how this interaction of hate started, and why you guys, as people, as a nation, have always been on the defensive side of things rather than the beginning side of things. And I agree with your point that with Iran, it was a defensive war. It was a preemptive strike for the sake of defense. Because, I mean, if Israel hadn't done that, the end result would have been a continuous warfare via proxy with 1,000 other players. So to me, it was a necessary evil. I don't want to say evil. I just want to say a necessity, right?
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah.
wonder your thoughts on that, since we started touching upon that too.
No, I guess it's a very good perspective to touch upon. So if we go way back, and I think these conflicts and the delegitimization campaign that we experience against Israel online and in campus protests in the U.S. and in Europe and across the world, I think it goes back to the very root of the question why Israel was established, right? So we have post World War II, post Holocaust. You know, where basically the idea of the extermination of the Jewish people, 6 million Jews perished during the Holocaust, and they said we've got to go back to our homeland. You know, this has been the Jewish homeland for more than 3,000 years here in the land of Israel, and they said, okay, we have nowhere to go. We have to have our own country, the one and only Jewish state. And the UN resolution adopted in 1947 basically split the land of Israel to two countries, two nations, one for the Jews here and one for the Arabs. The Jews accepted the resolution and announced the state of Israel. The Arabs declined the UN resolution and started a war against Israel, and from then the rest is history, right? So I guess every conflict, this question that is being raised of, do they accept, do the people do accept the notion that the Jewish people can have their own state, right? We're talking about more than 20, not sure the exact number, but more than 20 Muslim Arab nations, but we have only one state, right? And it's right here in the tiny land of Israel. So I guess everything goes back to that question. And when you hear protests in the U.S. protesters chanting from the river to the sea, it's basically the whole land. So they're against the state of Israel. They're saying it should be one Palestine, one nation for the Palestinians between the river and the sea, with no Jewish state in between. That's against, UN resolutions. It's against what most of UN nations have agreed and are calling for, a two-state resolution. So calling for from the nation to this, from the river to the sea, it's against all these principles and ideas.
Small pause there. See, you're being. You've always had this, but your arguments have always been built on logic and reasoning and resolutions and whatnot. While mine are a little bit
I guess it
more.
should be like that, no?
Mine a little bit more on the human nature. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear a lot of from the river to the sea, but then what? um, take out all the Jews, take them all out, but reestablish a Palestinian state, whatever. Uh, Let that be. Then what? I'm pretty confident that's not going to resolve the problem. So, and this is my take on this because this is how I started understanding Israel, right? Because again, half Arab, half Greek, both societies are very, very pro-Palestinian, right? So, which is funnily enough, both governments are very pro-Israel. So for
Mhm.
me, it's my choice. But being raised in these societies, there was a big pro-Palestinian notion, and then this was further enhanced in private schools. This was further enhanced in universities. So I actually studied with Arafat's daughter. So
Yeah.
it wasn't much of an argument I could have made there. But the way I understood Israel was when I started studying for my BA, right? So I started getting into the books of, I don't know, work like Machiavelli, realism, Realpolitik, all that stuff. So I started realizing the realist perspective of politics. And once you start realizing the realist perspective of politics, you understand something very, very simple, that Israel needs to exist, um, whether these people like it or not, for a series of reasons. One of which is the security of the West. And it might sound like a selfish reason, but it is a very strong reason. Um, Primarily that, and then you go into things like history. So that's how I started my path. I was like, okay, this country needs to exist because it protects the West from these people, and these people are like this because, again, different take,
Yeah.
upward debate, but these people are like this because they have not gone through their enlightenment phase, so they have not developed. They need to have this consistent war until go through their enlightenment phase, their whole philosophical blah 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 blah. So it needs to exist politically. And then you go into the history of it and you're like, okay, historically, there were some tribes there that belonged to this, sure. But there were also these people, right? So the claim is pretty solid on both sides, right? Historically. I again my perspective is that the Jews were there a little bit before. Just because, well, it
No, I
is.
mean, there's so many, just maybe if I can jump in, there's so many like archaeological and, actual feasible evidence. It's not just, the Bible, which of course is a big part of it, but it's not just like a book, right? You have actual feasible archaeological evidence of Jewish life, right? That has been here thousands of years ago. And when you talk about the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, people don't realize it. The protesters, the anti-Israel are chanting, we're the colonizers of the land of Israel. The state of Israel is the most successful case of decolonization in modern history, where
Mhm.
a land, and a people who were originally here were expelled to all over the world and then came back and built a home in their land, right?
And
The
very
indigenous
successfully.
people. Exactly. The indigenous people that lived here thousands of years ago, expelled all over the place, and then came back and built a home. It's the most successful case of decolonization. And so I guess people should be a bit more educated about history, I guess,
And
to
then I
learn
look
about
at
how
it
it
from
came to be. Yeah.
And then I did it from a religious perspective because I'm glad you mentioned it as well. And I found excerpts, for example, in the Quran that actually mention, for example, let the Jews have their land, right? So
Yeah.
that contradicts heavily the Muslim narrative at the current moment, or the Arab narrative. I'm hesitant to say Arab narrative because I'm seeing a lot of the Arab nations, most predominantly your neighbors. So, and I'm quite proud of it that I'm seeing Egypt, Jordan, even post Abraham Accords, the UAE, not really wanting to intervene in this and
Hmm.
understanding the necessity of Israel and wanting peace with Israel. But anyway, so religiously, you have references in the Bible. You have excluding Judaism altogether. You have references in the Bible. You have references in the Quran. For me, bases a very solid argument that a, a good portion of worldwide religions accept Israel for being where it is. right? And there is even a religious argument to be made pro-Israel. And most universities, most people in the universities that are chanting from the river to the sea don't really understand that.
And they don't know what river and they don't know what sea, right?
And
But
then,
I guess
yeah, sorry, go ahead, sorry, because
no,
I'll log this and I don't want to.
so we're now at a point now that we're speaking. So we had the ceasefire just this morning announced between Israel and Iran after this. Trump mentioned he called it the 12-day war, giving it a name, which is very symbolic of Israel's 6-day war. So that's two times the 6-day war, which we had in '67, but now it's maybe a 13-day war. But the ceasefire was announced this morning. And really the question is, what is going to be from here moving forward, right? What does the future hold for us? And I think that's a really good question to ask because we
What's your
had the
take on that?
Abraham Accords. Yeah, so I guess we had the Abraham Accords signed in 2020, where Israel normalized and basically made peace with Arab nations who we didn't have formal ties with, which includes the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and even Sudan. So these are nations that in the past called for, no relations and wipe Israel off, and now we have extremely good ties with them. We have daily flights to the UAE and we have thousands of Israelis traveling to these places back and forth. So I guess this is the vision that Israel wants for the Middle East to expand these accords, to have Saudi Arabia join and more
I think it
players.
will.
Yeah, and I guess now that Iran has been weakened and you see this axis of evil being teared down, basically, then I think there's a lot of hope for the region. And people say, warmongering and Trump. We just want peace. This is what we want. We just want peace and prosperity. And and of course, we cannot have that locally and domestically here at home without returning our hostages, which is another conflict, of course, happening as we speak, but the conflict in Gaza. So it's important for me to mention it here on your podcast. And I don't know if you can see, but I have the hostage pin right here on my
Mhm.
shirt to remind myself each day as well that we got to bring our brothers and sisters back home.
I passed by that site when I was there, and it gave me chills. It was a spectacular sight, and seeing the amount of people that protest for that, or I mean, it's not exactly a protest; it's a collection of "we want to be heard" sort of situation. It's absolutely mesmerizing to watch because you guys unified for that cause. It's what you said, brothers and sisters. You unified for that cause, and it's very touching to see. But I had a question for you, right? So, and that question sort of goes back a little bit to the 6 day and 12 day war you mentioned. So, do you think that as spectacular as the military is in Israel, because it is spectacular, all of your operations have been fantastic. I mean, strategically speaking, fabulous. Do you think Israel lacks in what people call soft power, political marketing?
In a sense that is it one of our like goals, one of our
In the
hidden
sense
mission?
that, in the sense that it hasn't, I mean, on a civilian sort of scale, it hasn't gained a lot of popular vote. So you have these people chanting from river to the sea that you have mentioned. So do you think that's because it can't market itself as this is why we're here and this is why we're doing what we're doing? Or do you think it's because these people just don't want to listen? Or do you think it's just poor education in the West?
It's a combination of all of the above, right? So, actually, so this recent conflict with Iran, it just happened on Friday morning, and it canceled Pride, right? We had a Pride parade in Tel Aviv planned for June 13th. It canceled, of course, the Pride parade, and Caitlyn Jenner, who a lot of people know from the
So,
Kardashians. So Caitlyn Jenner was the guest of honor for Tel Aviv Pride, and I had the opportunity to meet her personally when she arrived here. And she said on the press conference the day before Pride got canceled, and she caught up in this situation and this conflict. She said, "You guys have a marketing problem." And I kind of agree. I kind of agree. I mean, you have the majority. That's how it seems, at least, of people online on social media are basically against Israel and are chanting these anti-Israel. So we do have a marketing problem, but I guess some of it you can convince people who just don't know. Like they haven't been here or they just don't Israelis, they haven't heard of the conflict. They just don't know. And I'm not, blaming them for anything. They just don't know what's going on. So that's one case of people. But I think there is a big chunk of people who no matter what, points you'll make to them and how much you'll educate them on what happened, let's objectively as much as possible, they won't be convinced. They're just against the concept of the Jewish people having their homeland on the land of Israel, on the territory that we are sitting right now, that I am sitting in
So
right
you think
now.
that no matter what, it's anti-Semitism. It's not a matter of just marketing or just education or a combination of those. You actually think there's anti-Semitism in there.
Not only do I think there's a big portion of that that is just pure anti-Semitism. Not everyone. I think there's people are different from each other. I think there are groups that are they just don't know enough. And we've seen cases, of these celebrities, these Hollywood celebrities who tweet things and then
Mhm.
they delete and sometimes their peers, they say, "Hey, what you just tweeted is against my people," and they don't even know what it means. So you have these groups of people who just don't know enough. And maybe if you educate them about the conflict, they'll be smarter to tweet these messages out. But I'm not saying them, but I'm saying there is a large portion of people who, no matter what you'll say, it's just pure anti-Semitism. They just don't want us here. They want us to go back. They say go back to Europe. Well, we have Israelis with no European roots, right? They actually have Arab roots. And people don't know that the Jewish population is a nation here in Israel is a nation of immigrants. We came here from all over, from Europe, from the U.S., from North Africa, from Iran, from Iraq, from Lebanon. My great great grandmother. That's an I don't know if that interests you, but she came
Yeah, of
from
course.
Syria. We found that in My Heritage. You have this DNA testing going on. I found that I'm 30%, sorry, 3% Syrian, my great grandmother.
I
So
was gonna say you were Nordic, but okay.
I'm actually of Polish descent, so I'm 97 percent Polish descent, but I have this 3% Syrian. So we're just a nation of mixed backgrounds and these heritages, and people just don't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So I'm sorry, I just got mesmerized by the discussion. Yeah, natural speaker, man. You're a natural born speaker. Let me redirect a little bit.
I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so in your in your environment, in your local community and circles of, I guess, friends, colleagues, um, how do you view maybe this conflict or Israel's position in general? Is there a lot of talk against it, or just how do you view the situation from your perspective?
So look, I've been pro-Israel for quite some time. You know, one of my very good friends actually studied in Tel Aviv University. He did his master's, right? And one
Hmm.
of the reasons why I didn't visit was back at that time you were getting bombed again. So he was telling me stories of getting these alerts on his phone and going. So for me, it's a very basic process. Once you understand the necessity of Israel, and it's a hard narrative to explain to people, especially people that so, right, in Israel, when you talk about the left or the right, you're talking about a very separate thing, a very different thing to what you're talking about in terms of left and right in Europe or the West, right?
Hmm.
So the left here automatically stands pro-Palestine, and then
Yeah.
you have the far right that also doesn't stand pro-Palestine but stands anti-Israel.
Hmm.
So you have a very thin line of people that actually are pro-Israel.
Hmm.
So I've had countless debates on this a number of times, and the main continuous main argument is, what about the massacre of the children in Gaza? And then you're like, guys, okay, that's a humanitarian perspective. You can't lead politics based on a humanitarian perspective A, and B, at the end of the day, Hamas doesn't really give a shit about these children, right?
Yeah,
So if they're being used as human shields by terrorists, there's not much any nation would be able to do.
right.
So a lot of people focus on the humanitarian side. It's a very hard argument, and there's constant debate about it consistently. And you can even see this on a political level because the
Yeah,
current government stands with Israel. We want to buy your air defense system. We want to implement it here in Greece. We have a situation with Turkey, the same Turkey that called for a unification of the Muslim nations against Israel. There's a lot of common ground there, and there's a lot of not common, parallel history between Greece and Israel.
yeah,
But
yeah,
people don't understand that, and they just focus on the humanitarian aspect. To me, even that humanitarian aspect is flawed because it's based on, again, a bunch of terrorists that don't really care about their own children.
yeah.
Um, it's 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 not something easy to explain to someone that, you know what, you have a kid,
Hmm.
your son or daughter, you take them to kindergarten. Underneath that kindergarten, you have, I don't know, a bomb factory or a weapons factory or a bunch of terrorists just, chilling there preparing to attack. They go to the rooftop of that kindergarten, they throw a rocket, a missile into their perceived enemy. That
Yeah.
enemy retaliates that attack, and that results in the explosion of the whole building, including the kindergarten where your kid is, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I mean, and Hamas had this entire headquarters right under Shifa Hospital in Gaza, right? Right. So you have this. So people are saying we're bombing hospitals. According to international law, if you have a hospital that is serving terrorists as their headquarters, it is a legitimate target. They're using the hospital facilities as their headquarters for terrorist activity. They're taking advantage of it and again, so this is a whole conversation, but maybe just to close on that, the war could be the conflict with Gaza, right? The war between Israel and Gaza could could have ended yesterday,
mhm.
right? If Hamas gave us back all of our hostages and agreed to lay down its weapons. It just comes down to that. We have no business continuing this war only to have our people back and not to have this terrorist regime terrorizing neighborhoods in southern Israel.
I
It's
want to play a
fascinating.
little bit of devil's advocate, if you don't mind. One of the key points I heard when I was there by one of the Muslims actually in Jerusalem was that Gaza's struggle is mostly for access to creating a port, and
So
that Israel does not want. So I just wanted your take on that.
yeah, so again, so people going back to the history because this is important. In 2005, the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, decided to unilaterally, so it wasn't an agreement with the Palestinians, they decided that on ourselves, Israel is basically gonna detach from the Gaza Strip. So we took all our forces. Of course, we had military presence in the Gaza Strip until then. Decided unilaterally to separate from Gaza, taking out all of the military force, and basically leaving Gaza for the Palestinians for themselves to control. A lot of people don't mention that when they're speaking about the history of Israel and Gaza. What happened a year after that in 2006? Hamas won the election, right? So they chose Hamas to come into power, and from then on, it basically turned Gaza into this terror army and regime. We left them with greenhouses for them to develop agriculture
Mhm.
and do all these great things to develop their economy. And they took these greenhouses and turned them into military posts right across into our border. So people don't know that it was called the separation plan.
I didn't know that either.
It was very controversial in Israeli society. We had like half of the population against it, saying it will only come back at us. Fast forward to October 7th, right? But half said, it will just come back at us because you're giving them the opportunity to do whatever they want. And the other half said, let's just give him Gaza for them to control. and Hamas took over at that point, and the rest is history. So why we didn't allow them a port to not have them ship in
Exactly.
all these ammunitions, all these missiles, um, which they did underneath tunnels with a border with Egypt, across the Philadelphia corridor. They managed to do it anyway. But one of the reasons we had this so-called siege, right, on Gaza was for them to not enter all these equipment that could be harmed against Israeli population and civilians.
And my
Uh,
second question was around the funding of these organizations. So, see, if I was a leader, right, and no matter whether this was whether I was dealing with, I don't know, top of my mind, North Cyprus or Israel, so a nation I didn't want to be there, and I was leading the opposite nation, I would not have used that funding for weapons. That funding would have
right.
been used a lot more into things like university, building my soft power capabilities, my marketing capabilities, and you know, it turns out that you can win a lot more battles with a pen rather than a sword. So I just wanted your take on that too. Plus, I've seen live from university people that were funded by Hamas to be there. Arafat's daughter, presume, mostly being there, making thousands and thousands and thousands, living on state-owned property for free. So huge benefits, arguing for pro-Palestine, while the people there did not even have access to proper food. So for me, that's not a very patriotic thing to do, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah, I mean, and you have, talking about international support and international aid going into Gaza and into the Palestinians there. You have UNRWA, right? The UN agency for the Palestinian refugees, who is basically a UN
Opposing terrorism.
agency that some of its workers and employees took part in the October 7th massacre, and you have this all it's all factual. You can look it up, and you have actual evidence of these employees taking part in the massacre of October 7th, actually taking part in a massacre against Jewish people. So you
I
have
know they were
UN
involved and they
employees.
were covering them. I didn't know they took part. That's insane.
They actually took part, and there's evidence for that. We can pull it up, and we can share it whenever, or post it comments for people to see. But you have actual UNRWA employees, which is UN agency employees, taking part in the murder and the massacre of October 7th. So this is just absurd. And the role of the UN that was established right after World War II to end the wars and to make peace, is funding eventually UNRWA facilities served as Hamas Hamas posts
Hmm.
and hiding places, and they were, Hamas basically took control of whatever he wanted from UNRWA. And we found it out only after October 7th, when we saw all these evidence of UNRWA facilities being served or being taken advantage by Hamas. So a terrorist organization actually taking over the UN facilities and exploiting them against us, which is it's total absurdity, and it's morally corrupt in the worst way possible, right? And I think people should know that it was as well. But I have one point that I wanted to make, and you reminded me of that, talking about protests and the left and right in Israel. So people should make the distinction between opposing the Israeli government, which is, of course, it's legitimate, right? Everyone
Hmm.
has their opinions, and you can be against a government and its policies. So there's a difference between opposing and being against Israel's government and its policies, and then being against Israel as a concept and Israel's right to exist. And I think a lot of
You're
people
right.
blur these lines, and they say, "Oh, we're against, Netanyahu, we're against his government." That's fine. I'm also, we can put open brackets. I didn't vote for Netanyahu, and I'm not in favor of his current government. But there is a difference between that and being against the concept of a sovereign having the
Mhm.
right to exist. So that's a point I
Mhm.
just wanted to make.
No, no, you did the right thing pointing it out. I just wanted to go back a little bit to the UN situation. How do you feel about the international arena's role in what's going on in Israel ever since October till today, and more so today with Iran? And how do you feel about the UN's role? Did the agency itself take any actions against UNRWA? Um, or will it, or do you think it at some point it has to, or do you just think that decision making is super slow on an international level as well? Or I don't know, the concept of the failing West is expanding into these organizations too. So I just wonder your take on how you feel about that.
Well, I think the UN is a separate conversation, but I think if we just mention briefly about the UN as an organization, very disappointing. I think statements from October 7th and now made by from the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, talking about ending the conflict and not mentioning the hostages and saying we have to lay down our weapons. I mean, again, if they kidnapping elderly people, kidnapping young children from their homes, and
Right.
some of them are there for now more than 600 days. We're talking about women, elderly people. We had Abigail. Abigail, she was 3 years old and was kidnapped, was 50 days in Hamas captivity. You talk about it's something that is against international law. You have nothing that is more against international law than kidnapping a 3-year-old and holding her for 50 days, right? And nothing, no tweets about, just the hostages. It was always the last thing he mentioned, maybe in a tweet, if he wanted to mention it, and saying, in a small lowercase letters at the bottom. So very disappointing from the UN. But talking about, other countries, and I guess right after October 7th, there was a wave of support that Israel had, and rightly so, from the international community. But then it went and a bit faded away until now, and for several reasons. I mean, again, I think the war could eventually be ended if there's a good deal being made, but there is not, and they're not giving us back our people. So something has to be done, and the current government says, okay, let's continue the military campaign in order to bring them home. I'm not sure that's the best way forward. I think we should just agree to a ceasefire, to end the war, to have our people back. But the international community's approach has been quite ambivalent. Some support, some are backing off, and it's just important to remember what we're fighting for. I mean, it's not we're not fighting to conquer Gaza and have our people go there and live there. We don't want none of that. Gaza is for them, for the Palestinians to have. We just want peace. We don't want a terror army next to us, being a threat to civilians who live a few kilometers away from the border. We just don't want that. And it's just an important thing to mention.
No, no, it's good that you're mentioning everything I'm sort of missing out on mentioning. So, little angel voice in the back of my head, it's fine. But yeah, no, look, I sure. Do you think there will be peace in the region?
Wow, that's like the million or billion dollar question, right? Um, you have to be optimistic. We had our former president, the late Shimon Peres. He's like an iconic figure in Israeli politics. He said that optimism is his like not only a way of life, but like a course of action. Like that's what moves him forward in his day-to-day actions, policies, politics. You have to be optimistic in this region to survive. Because if you're not going to be optimistic, then what do you have, right? So he said pessimism is not a course of action. So we have to be optimistic. I do believe there can be peace. Um, Maybe a short term, more of a short term peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is something that would be fascinating to see in my lifetime, I guess. You know, The
I think
biggest.
that's coming. I feel it in my bones that that is coming. I'm not too sure
I
about.
hope so. And there's talks. There's been talks under the radar about a possibility of a normalization between Israel and Indonesia, which is super interesting because that's the largest Muslim country in the world, right? Indonesia. So if Israel would have peace with the largest Muslim country in the world in terms of population, that's fascinating, and that will be a very good thing. So I hope to witness that in my lifetime. Peace between Israel and the Palestinians, unfortunately, and I say that it's super unfortunate. I don't think we're going to see in the in the near future. That's just my assumption. I think it's so complex. There's so many complexities and intricacies of how you actually can manage to bring peace about between us and them. I hope so. Maybe I can be mistaken and we can have it in the short term, but I think more like probably more with the Muslim nations around us, we'll have some peace.
I'll go back to the initial point I wanted to make, and there's 2 points I want to make about this. Is if you want peace with the Palestinians, then you need to go through 2 or 3 generations of basically no war whatsoever, and even if you argue that the Israeli side wants that or doesn't want it, whichever side you take on that coin, what is 100% sure is that Hamas doesn't.
For sure.
So whether you guys want it or not, the other side does not want that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's a famous saying by the late Prime Minister Golda Meir. She was the first female prime
Mhm.
minister in Israel. Sorry, I think I said president. I meant prime minister. She was the first female prime minister in Israel, and actually one of the first female heads of state in modern history. That was back in the 70s. So Prime Minister Golda Meir, she said a very famous saying. She said, if the Arabs, meaning the Arab nations around us, if the Arabs lay down their weapons, there will be peace. If Israel lay down their weapons, there will be no Israel. So, and this has been our mantra ever since. Like, we have to have our weapons to defend ourselves by ourselves, no matter the cost, but we have to because we have nowhere else to go. We just don't. We have one Jewish state. Um, But if they lay down their weapons tomorrow, yesterday, then we will have peace. That's what we want. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and the second point I sort of wanted to make, and it has to do a lot with your neighbors. I'm glad to see that most of your neighbors don't want to intervene, and the reality is, and again, I don't want to be that guy, but the reality is that post 6 Day Wars onwards, a lot of these Muslim nations took in a lot of Palestinian people, right? And if you go to Egypt, they're like, yeah, this and that Israel, this and that Israel, this and that Israel. But then if you talk to them about the Palestinians, they're like, you know what? Screw the Palestinians. And you get that a lot in Egypt. You definitely get it in Lebanon because Lebanon got massacred with everything that happened in Lebanon.
yeah,
And you get that a lot in Jordan. So it's these countries deeply don't want to deal with the Palestinians. They have a sort of Muslim obligation to not particularly be too happy with Israel, but they're actively seeking peace with Israel as a nation. And to me, that's very interesting to see because I never thought I'd see something like that. And from October 7th onwards till today, including today, you see that more evidently than ever. You see the Egyptians saying, you know what, we're good.
yeah,
You see the Jordanians saying, we're okay. I'm pretty confident that even if you had a different Syria than the one you have today, you would have still seen the exact same thing. We're good. You see the UAE saying we're good. So to me, it's them understanding that really Israel is not in the particular case a problem. There's a lot of IP political economy going on. There's a lot of exchange. There's a lot of money to be made, business to be made. Honestly, you're not that different of people. We're not that different of people. Whether you're looking at Greeks or Arabs or Israelis, they're pretty much the same kind of people.
Yeah, I
So the
mean,
mentality,
yeah,
the
no,
mentality.
yeah, sorry, yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, you talked about Egypt, and the first thing that came to my mind, and you mentioned the Six-Day War, was that Egypt was, the biggest enemy of Israel at the time, right? The Six-Day War and leading up to the Yom Kippur,
Hmm.
the Yom Kippur War in 76. They were the most, bitter enemies, the biggest enemies we had. And when Anwar Sadat, the late Egyptian president, decided to surprisingly visit Israel, speak to the Israel parliament. People thought it was a scam, right? When that happened and he decided to come over after the war ended, people thought it was some sort of like a, a plot that he would arrive by the plane and then his special troops would come out and do this sort of operation again. Like people did not believe that he actually landed in Israel, but the late president of Egypt landed in Israel, went to Jerusalem, spoke to the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, and we made peace. And this is just the example of if they lay down their arms, we will make peace. We do not have any intention to make wars, to start wars, to be this empire. And, we just want to live in our land, in our small place, and just live life to the fullest, be a prosperous nation of high tech, of culture, of, tourism, just a nation among the nations and just have peace. And this is what happened with Egypt, followed then by Jordan, the two our two neighbors who we made peace with. Now going to 2020, the Abraham Accords with some of the Gulf states and Morocco, and hopefully soon with more. And people say that they hope that maybe even with Iran, and it sounds kind of absurd because we just had this war with Iran, but people really like not even cynically, they really believe that in some years from now, if the regime will change, then Israelis and Jews will be able to travel to Tehran as we did before the revolution in the 70s. We had great relations with Iran before
Tehran
the
was a different place back then.
it was a different place, and we had an embassy. People traveled there. My great grandparents, I know it from my family. They traveled regularly to Tehran. They've been to the bazaar, the market in Tehran, right? They have pictures from there. So I hope that in my lifetime, I get to visit Tehran and visit the great people of Iran there. I hope so.
That's very ambitious. It definitely needs a regime change, and I don't know. Do you feel like that's coming?
You can never know because we had no clue a day before that we're going to have a ceasefire today.
Hmm.
So the Middle East, we say the Middle East calendar has its own time, right? It has its own thing going on. I hope so. You never know how, regimes can fall in an instant, right? In a day. Nobody predicted the USSR was gonna fall and it collapsed. The Assad regime, nobody expected that in just one day, Assad will take the plane, go to Moscow, and the Syrian nation is going to change forever, right? So these things can happen quickly. I don't know. I hope so for the Iranian people for their better life and prosperity. But let's
Well,
wait and
look,
see.
I have second thoughts about that, and the reason why I have second thoughts about that is because yes, you're gonna overthrow a regime now, and Iran in the '70s was a different place to Iran today. Iran in
Yeah.
the '70s was a way better place than what it is today, and in order for it to get back to that, it's same thing with the Palestinians. You'll need a couple of generations to go by before you can start seeing progress. That's how I feel about it.
Interesting. I feel it can happen even quicker than that. I think it could happen in the near future. Um, but again, we'll wait and see. We don't know. We still don't really know the outcomes of this recent conflict. Some people say that now that it's actually ended, that there's a ceasefire now that this specific campaign ended. Now there's an opportunity for the Iranian people to get out and uprise against the regime. I don't know how feasible it is, but I'm holding my fingers. Let's wait and see.
Makes sense. It is weekend, so it would make sense. I have two last questions for you, right? Actually,
Sure.
three. But the last one is more like a sort of wisdom statement from you. But the first one is, what do you think Israel's role in the world should be moving forward?
Um, it's a good question because you think of when you ask like a role in the world, you feel like you're entitled to have a certain role, like like the US has a role, or some
Mhm.
European countries have a role. I'm not sure if Israel should have like an outspoken and clear role. Like we just want to live, to make business, have a prosperous future for ourselves, uh, live life to the fullest, travel to other places, make business, develop our economy. Um, as anyone, you mentioned before, we're pretty much all of us are the same. We're the same, right? We're all the same. Um,
100%.
so I guess I don't see a specific role other than just, I guess, our role just should be making peace with our neighbors as much as we can for the better lives of our families, of our people. That
I,
would be
I,
the best goal. Yeah.
so that kind of leads me to the second question, and that is, do you think that you should be strong as a nation? You kind of answered that previously with the statement, laying down the arms or not. But, I spent a lot of time during my COVID years watching a lot of movies and a lot of series. Most of those involve a series of operations that have been done throughout the world. And I saw Sacha Baron Cohen's, for example, most serious work, and I was mesmerized by that series. And in his work in Syria, I don't remember the agent's name, so who he was pretending to be, but I mean that was mind blowing to me. But do you think that Israel should? I mean, obviously, you think Israel should have a place in this world, but do you think it is accomplished solely through strength, or should we focus on things like IPE, marketing, etc., etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that not only do we have a choice, but we have to be strong, and not only strong, we have to be the strongest in the region, and some would argue in the world in terms of some capacities that we have, right? Intelligence and others. But not only do we have the option, but we have to be the strongest. That's our survival instinct. That's our survival gene. They say, that the Jewish gene is the survival gene. So the lessons that we take as a nation after World War II, after the Holocaust, when we didn't have a nation, we didn't have an air air defense, a military that would protect us in Europe, right, in the gas chambers. The lessons that the Jewish nation took after World War II, after the Holocaust, the worst atrocity in modern history, or perhaps in history, is that we have to have our own place, our own nation, our own military to protect us, and by ourselves, right? For ourselves, and we have to be the strongest, because then we just won't be here. And exactly as I said before, we cannot lay down our arms. If they lay down their arms, there will be peace. If we lay down our arms, there will be no Israel. So we have to be strong, and we have to be the strongest to have a place in this world.
You're right. I agree with you. I'm just mesmerized at how you have achieved it because you're looking at the intelligence across all of the Mediterranean, and they all pretty much suck, right? Or the military across the Mediterranean, and it's not an efficient military, no matter which nation you take, right? On both sides, Africa or Europe. And then you have this little tiny nation that's aced it in terms of military and intelligence, aced it, undoubtedly aced it. And to me, it's just mesmerizing how you guys have made that happen.
Yeah, I guess it's a combination of having this fire under your behind, that is this survival instinct, right? When you have no other option, you have to be the best. You have this fire under you, which is basically you have to survive, then that makes you accomplish, the best you can. Because of the military service, which is obviously mandatory in Israel, everybody has to serve in the military. Then you have a lot of ex-military people who then, come with this intelligence background and take it to the private market, and that's like the driver of the economy. So that's actually another thing that created this amazing intelligence capabilities is the military service that we have to go through, and then we exit to the market and enter the economy and the startup ecosystem
And
with
you
this.
actually learn something in the military, right? You go into the military and you're trained, combat. You become a trained civilian pretty much when you get out. By the time you're out, and you don't have that. You serve in Greece in the army. You don't have that. You don't practice Krav Maga or whatever, or
Yeah, yeah.
you don't really get in depth into it. So it's really fantastic to see how you've set that up as a nation. I am always mesmerized by the military capabilities and intelligent capabilities of Israel. Cool. So I don't want to take any more of your time. My last question to you is: do you have any words of wisdom you want to impart about, I don't know, Israel, the international arena, yourself, your experiences to younger Israelites, younger people, younger generations globally?
Well,
Uh,
that's yeah, that's big shoes to fill here to have my own mantra for life or for
you've done
younger.
great so far. I'm sure you come up with something.
Yeah, I guess, being in Model UN and seeing and experiencing this atmosphere and environment of, you know, meeting people from all around the world, exchanging ideas, creating friendships, like you and I had from our Model UN experience. So I guess my mantra for everyone is just, every day wake up and strive and encourage yourselves to be the best version of yourselves as possible, right? Because what do we want in life? We want to, fulfill the highest purpose uh, of ourselves as human beings. I think that's what everyone wants, to be the best version of yourselves and to fulfill the highest purpose of ourselves as human beings on this earth. So if you call it a tip, a mantra, a recommendation, a suggestion, is for everyone to just wake up and ask themselves, what can I do in my small little place in this on earth to be the best version of myself, to fulfill the highest uh, purpose of myself as a human being. That's what I'll say.
You know what? That's fantastic. I think there's no better statement to finish this, and I think we'll wrap it up with that. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Gentlemen, wisdom right here.
I had
So
so much
thank you.
fun. Yeah. Thank